folks, welcome back to another episode of the IMGPH podcast. And I'm sure if you're watching this podcast, you all have probably watched numerous programs and films on platforms such as Netflix and National Geographic. Our guest today has actually had a bachelor's degree in film and television, followed by an extensive career in the world of media, prior to diving into the world of public health, where she got an MPH. She's an NYU GPH grad and is now at her dream job at the University of Washington as a research coordinator within the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences. I cannot wait to hear all about your journey. Cat Hartwell, welcome to the IMGPH podcast. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you, Aman. I'm very happy to be here.
I mean, we've spoken to so many GPH grads and professors. You're one of the first that has been, I would say that I would consider you more of a media person first and then a public health individual second. So you spent decades of your life starting your career in film and television, and I'd like to go back to the beginning. How did that whole journey begin for you?
Ooh, so that's interesting. I actually started my undergrad career thinking I was going to study international relations. I always wanted to travel, and I wanted to do sort of humanitarian work on that front. But when I got to my second year of Boston University in my program and I took the economics class, I was like, I do not think I can do this. And at the same time, there was a really cool film scene happening at Boston University, and I would see all these like at the time cute boys on bikes with their film equipment and cool looking people, and I was like, what are they doing? And so I had to transfer schools from the College of Arts and Sciences to the College of Communications, and it changed my whole outlook of what my education looked like. And I studied abroad in London, which was really cool. But even then, I was like torn between photojournalism and film, and I just was like a curious person always. Not quite sure. I was not one of those people who had their clear vision of, 5 year, 10 year, 15 year. I just kind of took a hard turn, a leap of faith, if you will, into the field of film, and it was really fun. When I graduated, I had no idea what I was going to do with that degree, though. So I moved to I moved to New York with a couple of friends who were also questioning what area of film we were going to go into and what was next. And my first job was actually in a magazine, a lifestyle magazine in Soho. And then while I was doing that job, I interned simultaneously with a documentary producer on a music doc that it never came out, but it just like showed me I actually was still interested in film. And then I got years later, there's a little twisty turny road here too, but I got my first television job working on a VH1 program about stereotypes and racism in television. And it was called Ego Trips Race-A-Rama. It was a really fun first project. I started at the very bottom rung, uploading video footage and doing lots of research, working super long hours over the summer. But it was a really, really fun first project. And I also think like material wise, it was interesting and important to talk about. So that was my launch into the world of media. And
Many
then,
GPH students probably don't know about the world of media as much, but we all do realize the importance of media, and you have started over there. I'd love to hear actually about when you started this journey, right? Like you said, bottom of the rung intern at VH1 type of thing that you were doing. And what was a day in the life like over there? Like what does someone have to actually do in the media world when you're executing all these tasks that might be different from someone in the world of public health right now?
yeah, I mean, I think even going back to that position as a production assistant, that's like there's intern, then the next level is production assistant, then you work your way up to associate producer, and then eventually producer, and then, that's kind of the hierarchy of the industry in television. But as a production assistant, you do everything. And I think that going back to that far back, it really showed me how to multitask and be able to juggle different things, because you're receiving, at the time it was tapes of like music videos that we were then digitizing for the editors. Simultaneously, you're doing like fact checking for things that they need for legal purposes. Again, it's like MTV Viacom, so they were very, very particular. I wasn't creating scripts at that time, but eventually, as you move up the rung, you're doing that. But I think that, you with the fact checking, you're reviewing scripts. So there was a lot of research, even on the media side of things, pulling up video options to this was an archival show, so the kind that like you look at old videos. So if you're talking about something, a TV show or like a rap group for the case of this program, you're looking at like 1990s videos. It was really fun having access to the MTV archival library. Was really fun, and I'm not gonna lie, I maybe pulled some things for my own purposes to watch music videos in my spare time. It was a gift.
It sounds very it's kind of like it set you up for your path later on because the work sounds similar where you're doing multiple tasks, you're researching everything, and then you're formulating a cohesive direction with whatever industry you're in when it comes to public health. But I'll stick to media right now because I'm excited to go into the public health. I wanna. You're an assistant producer, and then you were a producer. What is even a producer in this context for some people that don't know?
Yeah, so eventually, after my many steps up the ladder and twists and turns, I found my way to being first a field producer, which was really, really, again, fun, but also stressful. So, field producing is when you're going out into the field with your crew, and if there's talent with you. Your director, your cinematographer, you'll have a sound person. You also you're in charge of the casting. So if and this is for documentaries too, if you're doing a story like we did in Australia for Cooked, on fire and foods that involve fire, we had to cast, and we were casting from the Martu tribe in Western Australia. And so we were so far away. Literally, I think like the furthest we could be away in New York City from Perth, Australia, and plus 12 hours of travel. Um, and so, how do we cast that far away? So, I built a relationship, which all of this stuff eventually transfers to my public health work. But I built a relationship first with an academic at Stanford talking about the subject matter. And then he introduced me to a young Indigenous filmmaker named Curtis Taylor, who was really like our entry point into the community. But also, it was cool because we got to work with Curtis, and Curtis filmed some of this stuff, and he got producer credit. So it was like a really cool collaborative experience. But that was also part of the field producer role, is finding someone in such remote location, so far away, who can help you get access to the people that you want to tell their stories. And so Curtis really then helped us with casting, and then you plan the other part. A big part of producing is logistics, and in some of the places I've filmed, logistics has been very challenging. Remote locations like Western Australia, the Amazon River Basin in Peru, talking same series but talking about chocolate. And even more as a producer, but I was in charge of logistics for filming underwater in the Great Barrier Reef. So there's lots of legal things to consider and safety things to consider. And on top of that, you have to make sure that your crew, when you're with them in the field, are happy and are fed. And it helps to like know what people's coffee preferences are, for example.
I I mean, you have already taken me through both sides of the globe in a way in the past 2 minutes. Can you tell me about some of the places and the experiences you had as someone that was working in production in that journey before you went into public health?
Yeah. The experience of filming in Western Australia was truly a dream. Like sleep. First of all, it was just so remote. We had to take, it was like 22 hours of flying from New York City to get to Perth with a layover in Abu Dhabi. Then once you got to Perth, you had to take a 2-hour flight, which was really fascinating because there were all these mining workers on the flight, and that seemed to be a pathway. We were definitely like stuck out like sore thumbs. We weren't the regulars on that route. And then from there, we took a bus into the outback to the to the Martu lands, and that's where we stayed. But there wasn't housing. There's not a hotel when you're that remote. So that experience, we had our own pop-up tents that were like just the top of it was like just here. And Australia is famous for having all kinds of poisonous creatures. So, as you lay under your pop-up tent before you go to sleep, I was like, spiders? No, it's going to be fine. And obviously I'm here to live the tale, to tell the tale. And so, yeah, that's just one experience, but it was really like, it was incredible to be in that environment and talking to people who, I met a woman who was there for first contact with Western civilization. She was one of the elders. I mean, that was just truly, I don't even know the word for it. Like, it was just like awesome. I mean that in the way of like awe-inspiring.
I mean, I'm 100% sure you can go into 5,000 different stories from each place. I'd love to hear about all the places you've been through as a part of this experience of shooting around the world.
I can. I'll do a more concise version. Something that helped me get interested in disasters. There's a couple of experiences that I had. One was on our location shoot in Peru. There was a landslide while we were shooting. And so shooting, I mean filming. And so on our drive back, we got to the one road that takes you in and out of town, and you couldn't cross it. And so I had never seen a landslide. It was a mudslide. It washed out the roads. We logistically had to deal with that situation. Fortunately, there happened to be an eco hotel up the road, and on our satellite phone, I got people in New York to get us the rooms that were available. And I was hustling little toothbrushes for the crew. But I mean, that was one experience that really stuck with me. And then for years of living dangerously, when I was in Australia in the Great Barrier Reef filming, there was a hurricane cyclone, and that was in 2015. So December 2015, and it was very severe. And so that too altered our plans, and there was loss of life during that event. And it just, again, like, we were filming a story about climate change and about how storms were going to become more intense and more frequent. And here we were faced with that in the middle of a shoot. So those are just some.
I can see some foreshadowing happening right now, and I think even the viewers know, especially the public health students, know exactly what's taking you into your direction. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear about how someone ends up working with organizations like Nat Geo and Netflix.
Sure,
What
yeah.
was that journey like? To me, it's fascinating that you have had such an extensive career doing incredible things and having such incredible experiences in production and media. And beyond that, you're in this direction. You're on a public health podcast right now, and I'd love to hear that experience of getting into these media outlets and that unlocking something for you. But more from a fan perspective, what is it like to get into Nat Geo and Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's not like a straight shot. So when I was a kid, I also wanted to be a photographer for National Geographic, like I think many kids do. And the closest I got was producing documentaries for National Geographic, so I'll take it. My husband happens to know a couple of photographers who have taken photos for National Geographic, and their stories are amazing. But I feel like this has been an adjacent, awesome journey. And so getting to do the National Geographic series, Years Living Dangerously, focused on climate change, was a dream. And if that project could have gone on for the rest of my life, I would have happily worked on that project for the rest of my life. And then a couple of years later, I worked on another Nat Geo project in partnership with Global Citizen. And
Yeah.
we got to go to South Africa. There was their Global Citizen concert. Beyonce was there with Jay-Z. That was, I pinched myself on that trip too. So there's an element of pinching yourself when you think about it, but the reality is, like, you're not working directly for National Geographic. Those aren't your credentials. Typically, you work for a production company that then is hired, or Nat Geo buys the series that you're working on. So it looks cooler in the credits, but
Mm,
you're not necessarily like, I wasn't employed by National Geographic. I was employed by Radical Media, which
got it.
makes a lot of really, really cool documentaries and other content. And similarly for Netflix, both times I worked on Netflix series. One, I was at BuzzFeed News, and the
Yeah.
other, I was at Jigsaw. And Jigsaw's Alex Gibney's company. He's an Oscar-winning director, and um, they get a lot of shine, I think, too. So
Um, there might be some students watching this that are very interested in media and they have had that public health itch inside of them and they've started the other way around maybe if they want to go in that direction. What would you, or even students that, there's also so many group class projects that keep coming in for people, whether they're in undergrad or grad school, where make a video on this, make a video on that. And there's always a few students that take it to the next level. Their passion of filmmaking, their passion of documenting, their passion of creating media comes out. What might that look, what might you tell those people that are going into the world of media or are interested in the world of media but are public health first and then thinking about media as an adjacent for themselves? What is something that comes to your mind when you think of those students?
that's a really good question. And I think I would recommend that they work on building up like the tangible skill sets of media production, like grab a camera, or learn how to edit. I learned how to edit. I never learned how to shoot, but that was helpful for, then I would get footage and string it together to like do the first pass of stories as a story producer, for example. But learn some of those tangible skills. There's lots of technology that you can DIY. I mean, Adobe has lots of stuff now that is very helpful, and I think that I say that because then you're able to actually make stuff yourself. I wish I could do more on that end, because even in projects I'm working on now, people are like, "Oh, it'd be great." And in public health, in the field, we're always like, "It'd be great if we had a video for that." But I don't shoot. I edit. I write. I produce. I can do the logistics. I can write a script, but I'm not a person who can pick up a camera. And I think that kind of stuff is really helpful if you can do one or two things, camera and sound or editing. It'll help you along the way to merge your interests.
Oh, so for if I hear you right, it's mainly find the start somewhere and then find your area of interest and then merge it with public health. Kind of like it's like finding a niche essentially in what you're good at in public health or what you enjoy the most, and then adding that with the media side of things if that's where someone's interest lies.
I think so. And I also think it's really important, and this is for those people, to translate the language of public health that's academic into a more digestible form for um, your average American or global citizen, if you will. And I think that sometimes the language is so um, in its niche that people don't understand what you're saying. And so if you can learn how to do that kind of translation, there's a place for that too in media, not just video, but I think in journalism as well.
Oh, I mean, how do you even approach and learn about public health through storytelling? How does one even do that?
I don't know how to answer that question. That's a tough
So
one. Um,
perhaps perhaps what are the things that come to your mind? Like what are some important facets of storytelling in your head when it comes to
yeah,
sharing a message?
I think it's really important to make it personal. And so when you're dealing with storytelling, I think it's like finding starting at a place that people can connect to, be it your own, or make it get to the human level of what's going on. You can hear about wildfire smoke. I'm sorry, I'm talking from a climate lens. Or you can hear about a disease, an infectious disease. But then when you meet someone whose child is suffering from that disease, it becomes real, and that's the storytelling element. Um, that's where I would begin, is finding your connection.
So share your personal story or share a personal story of someone, be the voice for someone else and take that forward, or carry your voice forward as a start in order to get into storytelling.
I think
It
so.
it helps because so much public health stuff is probably rather theoretical. And how do we support that theoretical with something that's emotional as well, and to kind of make the two of them fit together, I would assume.
Yeah, I think you have to make it relatable, right? Like, public health is for the public, and what the public is people. So, to me, it
Well said.
always does come back to people at the end of the day.
How lovely. I mean, look, there's this extensive career. I'm sure a lot of people are fanning over you right now, like, whoa, that's the kind of work Kat has done. I'm intrigued to know. I mean, we kind of have an idea, but very rarely does someone move from the media world into academia. It's in a way going, hey, wait, I'm gonna go back to school, but usually people go back to school to enhance something. You have on paper done a 180, but there's definitely enough pieces of the puzzle that people can tell, especially the public health students, of why you chose to come to GPH after this entire journey. What made you make that decision?
Yeah, I can. That's a little bit of a story, but I'll try to keep it short. I think that.
Just make sure you make it personal.
Oh yes, it is very personal. I think that for a while I had seen that the writing on the wall, that I thought that the documentary producer life was not necessarily sustainable as I was going to get older. All the travel, it's very long hours. It can be very stressful, and as fun as it was, I was like, I don't know if I'll be able to do this for another 20 to 30 years. So that's a like not that romantic, pragmatic lens, but also as I was working on stories over the years, I started to feel this like deep call that like I wanted to do something more directly impactful, and it was that Global Citizen series, which was the last program I worked on, that really like shone the light for me on what I thought like these skills as a producer could be transferable to something else. And I was getting up every day talking to people at NGOs in Nigeria and South Africa, listening to their work, thinking about logistics. And I was like, I think there's some there. Like there's some way that I could like do be on the other side of this, and be the one talking to the TV person, perhaps.
Wow.
That's not what I ended up doing. That's not the road I took. But that was
Yeah.
kind of this idea that started to bubble. And then I was having this debate, like, what is it I should study? Should I study policy, or should I study? Um, I don't even know. And someone planted the seed for public health, and when I looked at it, I was like, of course. Like, so many of the series that I had worked on touched on public health issues, especially the BuzzFeed series, where I had an awesome working experience with Azine Qureshi, who's at the New York Times now, and Ahmed Ali Akbar, who I think just started as a food person at this in Chicago. But at the time, I was working with these journalists on issues like swatting and harm reduction and the IVF and reproductive rights issue that is very very current. We were talking about in 2018. So I was like, oh, public health, of course. How obvious! Climate change is public health. Everything is public health. It makes so much
Mm.
sense.
And that took you into academia, and then what was that journey like at GPH? What was it like going to school after being in productions?
First of all, it was really quick. I applied in March and I started in September. So that was like, whoa, okay, I'm back in school now. I didn't really have a time to really think about what that was going to be like, the adjustment. I finished my job in July and started in September. Um, but it was really exciting to be back in school. I did have to like relearn how to study after, more than 15 years of being out of school. I had to relearn how to study. I had to remember, I mean, reading for school is really hard and different. And I just had to like relearn some old skills. And I took advantage of things like study groups in the beginning, especially. And then COVID came and ruined all that. But, there was a community in the beginning that I really took advantage of. Um, and there was lots of support, and I definitely was a person who was like, yes, tutoring sessions on statistics, thank you, I will do that.
Tell me about that academic journey. So it was 2 years. You were a pandemic cohort as well, I'm assuming. What was that
Yes.
that that entire experience of being a student like for you, and where did it take you into your journey after that?
I loved my experience as a student. I really was sad when it was over because if I honestly, like, if I could have tacked on one more year and done a double, some of my friends were MPA, MPH. In hindsight, I really wish I could have done something like that, just to extend the experience even longer, but and to bolster my education even more.
What is an
But
MPA for those of
ah,
that for that
yes,
someone who might not know?
no problem. Yeah, that's a master's of public administration. And actually, at University of Washington, there's a combo master's of urban planning that's pretty cool. I think there's lots of options for dual degrees that I didn't know about until I was already enrolled,
Mm.
which I recommend people who are interested in more than one thing with public health explore. But the education experience was awesome, and I was part of Dr. Dickey, his applied AGPHI, Applied Global Public Health Initiative Lab. And then I went on to be project manager in my second year of that lab, just kind of transferring those skills of being a producer to the lab. And I feel like I just said yes to everything when I was in school.
I think I've mentioned this on this podcast before with other guests. Should school kind of be something like this? Say yes to everything at school and say no to everything after you leave, so you find what you want. Is that kind of the vibe that people take?
Oh, I like that idea. I definitely am not a person who does that. But I think I also had to be careful because at one point I may have said yes to too much. And I know that people are wary of that. I was very fortunate that I was a full time student, and that I had carved that out for myself. I know that working people can't always say yes to everything. But for me, I feel like yes, in school, let me try lots of things and learn some of the things I maybe didn't like as much. And I have not yet said no after school. So if you have tips on how to do that, I'd love to hear them.
For the students that might be at GPH right now or our incoming students, we're recording this in 2024. Someone might be watching this in even 2026. What what are some of the classes that had a profound impact on your career and where you went after that?
Yes, I jotted these down because I felt like I would miss some of them. But for me, being interested in climate change, specifically, starting off with environmental health, global environmental health, which is a requirement anyways, was critical. I went on to take environmental health assessments, that course with Dr. Jack Caravanos, and that class, just built on what I had learned before. We went out and we did some air pollution sampling, just learning how that stuff works, and just building and deepening my knowledge on like air pollution, which is something that I look at now when thinking about wildfire smoke out here. Risk communication was a very important class for me with Dr. David Abramson. Um, I feel like that paired with management of public health disasters with Dr. Robin Gerson were like this disaster packet that like I was already curious about, but then I was like, oh yeah, there's a lot here. And as far as the suite of courses that were offered at the time when I was a student, like that really, I felt the through line with my interest in climate change. And then the kind of the most important class that I took related to the work I do now was a qualitative course with Alexis Mergenoff. It was a qualitative analysis mixed methods class. And that was, unfortunately, I took it in my last semester of school, or else I might have gone further into that kind of qualitative
Wow.
research, coursework. But that really set me up. If I had not taken that class, I would not have the job that I have today. And I want to add one more course that was
Of
like
course.
life changing period, which was the behavior and communications in global epidemics course in Abu Dhabi that Dr. Dickey leads. That was an amazing experience, but also like we were talking about that as COVID was beginning to unfold. And
Wow.
when I think about that course and the timing, it just felt so critical and important.
It's fascinating to see that GPH has courses, NYU GPH has courses where professors are kind of creating them in the midst of something that's happening in the world at the time, which has you're kind of influencing how people will think about it down the line and are in the weeds in a way while taking a class. I've noticed that from a few students I've spoken to over here. So you had the similar experience with your class in Abu Dhabi as well. So I'm 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 curious, Kat. Like when I go back to the Kat that started leaving film school and was confused and went in all different directions, this Kat after a master's degree seems very focused and clear on what she wants to do. Where did that take you after you finished GPH?
It's interesting you say that because I'm still always like looking at all of the potential trails off the road I'm on. But I knew I wanted to do stuff that was community engaged or community focused. I knew that I was interested in environmental justice and climate change, and um, the disaster preparedness element to that, community resilience, made a lot of sense to me. So, with all of that in mind, and I was applying for lots of jobs after I graduated, as everybody does. Um, I really thought I was going to end up in Washington, D.C. And
Wow.
I thought it would be more of a policy, some sort of, a nonprofit or an NGO. But someone that actually had spoken in my risk communication course, Chris Ludwig is her name, and she's actually with the White House now, with the Office of Science and Technology. She came and was a guest speaker. And after that class, I pinged Dr. Abramson and was like, she's amazing. And can I talk to her? I want advice from her. I want to do something. She had like sailed around the Arctic. She was just like an inspiration. And so he was like, of course, connected me. We had an informational interview, which I think are something I'll come back to later as advice for students. And it went great. And she sent me this opportunity at University of Washington. And at the time, I was very comfortably a New Yorker of 20 years. And my husband and I talked about it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to delete this job. I just, Washington's so far. And he was like, no, no, we said we'd go for everything. Like, go for it.
Wow.
And then I took a closer look at the job and I was like, oh my gosh, this is community engaged research, community resilience, disaster preparedness. There was like an element to it that was about extreme heat, which was something I'm very passionate about as an environmental justice issue. I was like, this is actually perfect for me. So I applied, and then I let Chris know I applied, and she pinged my current boss and was like, hey, this person's great. And I just think that's one of those things NYU has, is just the incredible network. I think that set me up for my interview and kind of probably helped push my resume to the top of the pile.
Oh, what is a day in the life now for you? What does this job entail? It seems to be like you left a 20-year life in New York and now you've gone into this direction. And what do you love about this job so much? What do you do on a regular basis?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just need to say I didn't have Seattle on my bingo card for where I was going to go after school. But University of Washington is great. It's really cool to be in this state that is so progressive, especially on climate change. I don't know, Jay Inslee like ran on climate in 2020, and we have lots of cool policies that I think help make the work easier. And I think that's why, with my interests, this makes a lot of sense for me to be here at this point in time. I started my position funded by a grant that was focused on extreme heat and extreme heat preparedness and response across the US specifically. And that grant is actually coming to a close. But I will say, like, what it looked like when I started and what it looks like now are two different things. In the beginning, I was doing lots of stuff focused on extreme heat. We did a national survey. I was getting that ready, distributing that, working with someone to do the analysis. I'm not a quant girl. We wrote up a paper that's been published, and we've built on that. We're like, so now today, a day in the life is this morning. I finished last looks at our manuscript before we send it to the co-authors, hopefully for the last time, for a build-on study on the heat work, looking at the lessons learned from the Pacific Northwest heat dome that happened in 2021. So this project's been long time in the works, but I'm excited to share it with the world when it finally comes out, hopefully next year.
a day in the life at a media job was very intense and looking out for each other, large teams on the ground. How does this job differ for you, though the world you're in right now? Are there similarities with that, or is a day in the life something that's more behind the computer for you?
Well, the timelines are way different. With television work, I had very specific deadlines and I knew what they were, and they were quick. And I think that was a learning adjustment for me coming into academia. When my boss, Dr. Nicole Arrett, would ask for things, I'd have to be like, when do you want this, and she'd be like, oh, next week, 2 weeks, what makes sense? And I was like, what, like, you don't need this tomorrow? So that was a nice adjustment for me. Now that I'm 2.5 years in my position, I'm helping with grant writing. It's the reason I'm going to have a job past the end of my first grant. I'm helping on, I think I counted it's between like 7 and 9 projects at the moment. Like, so there's, every day looks different, which I love. And that's similar to TV, but juggling lots of things. But the tasks themselves are so different. It depends on which project it is.
For the students that are considering moving into academia, perhaps without a PhD in your case, and someone that wants to move into academia or likes that life, what is the life of academia like for you?
So I think that being a research coordinator is a good place for someone who doesn't have a PhD and is considering a PhD, because you can really see up close what that looks like. My boss, who is running our lab, is constantly applying for grants and thinking about what's next. I'm like helping carry out the work for those grants, and to me that is I feel really grateful for that, because I get to sometimes interface with community, build trust for studies, for recruitment. We're working on a study right now on the coast of Washington looking at coastal erosion in a really rural community, and that's taken lots of um, like effort on our part to just go out there, let them know that we're serious, show our face, let them know who we are and what we're doing, allow for questions, that kind of relationship building stuff that, like, I know that the head of our lab doesn't have time to do, unfortunately. So that there's lots of engagement, which I love, um, and writing. If you like to write, there's lots of writing involved, including grant and manuscript and reports. Um, Logistics, that ties back to the old producer skills for me, but there's thinking about not necessarily budgets, but you have to think about budgets, but it's not like, I don't know, you're not in the weeds necessarily with the Excel spreadsheets, but I think it's like logistics in the way of, like, when are you going to interview people? When are you going to do the analysis? When will you be sharing it back? What does that realistically look like? That kind of planning.
Okay. Well, I'm some there might have been two kinds of students, someone who heard that and got very excited and someone who heard that and turned the video off. But you have given people a great direction on what to expect, and that's very important in their own skill sets that are there. We're finding our niches essentially through this podcast as well from time to time. So Kat, I'm curious to know in this final question, what's next for you? I know you're writing a new grant, so that's the next part of the job that's unlocking. What kind of experiences does that unlock for you?
Well, actually, all of our grants right now, I think, are in a good place. And so now it's doing the work. So I'm really excited. I was just in Alaska last
Wow.
week for a project. It's an EPA funded grant, and we're working with community partners in tribal communities, and they're going to be doing stuff over the summer to basically identify priorities for wildfire smoke impacts. And so that's just part of that project, but I'm excited about where we are with that. I've started recently in partnership with a PhD student. We're working on building capacity with freely associated states and territories in the Pacific. That's really awesome, and we have an awesome partner in Palau who's like helping us um, basically with our recruitment efforts. And The heat stuff is wrapping up, and so I'm looking forward to getting that out in the world. Um, and what else? I think one of the big things we have that's happening this year is the CDC Region 10 preparedness center. There's going to be a bunch of them. I don't know if you know about these, but they're these centers working on preparedness across the country. There's 6 right now work plans, and hopefully that'll get funded. So that's something that's a little bit in development, but that's keeping me busy for sure. I'm a
Oh, I mean,
I'm a work plan coordinator on that, so that's keeping me plenty busy.
so we're recording this in 2024, and I wonder where do you see the Cat Hartwell, the direction of Cat in 2 years from now, 3 years from now? The questions you didn't ask in undergrad, what are those? How are those questions answered now for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm figuring out a couple of things. I did actually apply for a Doctor of Public Health program
Nice.
this year um, at Johns Hopkins, but if I don't get that, I'm also not going to cry. It will be fine because I love what I'm doing, and thinking about next steps as far as the kind of work I'd like to do as like a program manager down the road. I'm particularly interested in extreme heat and environmental justice. So something in that realm. I do eventually want to come back to New York City because the East Coast is my home. But in the meantime, just enjoying all of the things that Seattle and the Pacific Northwest have to offer.
Well, we're wishing you good luck. We know DRPHs are great. We have one here at NYU as well, and some of our most eccentric guests are from the DRPH program, and you are someone that exemplifies that as well for what GPH is all about and the world of public health, how anyone is accepted no matter where they come from and they can contribute. Thanks for being on the podcast, Kat. It was lovely, lovely having you today.
Thanks, Saman. It's been great.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode. Like, subscribe, put a comment down below if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next episode.